Champion of what?
World champion of what?
I can drop a world lead, I don't even like running. You gotta run fast just to go and get some money. I'm no Elias K, you know how I'm coming. I ain't going to no Olympics, I ain't running, I ain't jumping. I can make 100,000 at the crib being funny.
This is the story of Olympic gold medalist Antonio Pettigrew. Racing towards ruin, the rise and tragic fall, a legacy tarnished by dark secrets. Pettigrew's story began in the humblest of settings. Born on November 3rd, 1967 in Macon, Georgia. Pettigrew was just another young boy with big dreams. But there was something different about Antonio. Something that would take him beyond the dusty streets of his hometown and onto the world's biggest stage. From an early age, Pettigrew had showed promise as a runner. His natural talent on a track was undeniable. But it was his work ethic and relentless drive to set him apart from the competition. By the late 1980s, Pettigrew had emerged as one of the top 400-meter runners in the United States, capturing the attention of coaches, fans, and sponsors alike. The 1991 World Championships in Tokyo marked the beginning of Pettigrew's ascent to greatness. Competing against the world's best, Pettigrew shocked the field, running the 400 meters in a blistering time of 44.57 seconds. He was crowned the world champion, and his star began to rise. In the years that followed, Pettigrew remained a dominant force in the sport, winning medals in both individual and relay events. He was known not for just his speed, but for his grace on the track, his sportsmanship, and the way he carried himself off the field. But behind the success and the public accolades, Pettigrew was fighting a battle that would eventually lead to his undoing. Like many athletes, Pettigrew dreamed of Olympic gold. In 2000, at the Sydney Olympics, Pettigrew's dream came true. Almost. He was a part of the U.S. 4x400 meter relay team that stormed to a victory, winning the gold medal in a stunning display of athleticism. The world cheered, and Pettigrew stood on the podium with his teammates feeling like he had finally reached the pinnacle of his career. But the seeds of his downfall had already been planted. The pressure to stay on top, to maintain that edge, had driven Pettigrew to make a choice he will regret for the rest of his life. In the years leading up to the Sydney Olympics, Pettigrew had secretly turned to performance-enhancing drugs, joining a growing number of athletes that were willing to risk it all for victory. For years, Pettigrew lived with his secret, but in 2008, it all came crashing down. During the trial of Trevor Graham, a track coach implicated in the Balco doping scandal, Pettigrew testified that he had used performance-enhancing drugs. His confession shocked the sports world, and the consequences were swift. The International Olympic Committee stripped Pettigrew and his relay team of their 2000 Olympic gold medals. The team consisted of Alvin and Calvin Harrison, Antonio, and Michael Johnson. His reputation was shattered. He went from being a celebrated Olympic champion to a disgraced athlete. His legacy was forever tainted by the revelations. Pettigrew's fall from grace wasn't just a public scandal. It was a deeply personal one. He had built his entire life around his achievements on the track, and now those achievements were gone. Pettigrew struggled with the weight of his actions and the loss of his identity as an athlete. For a time, he found comfort in coaching. Antonio became an assistant coach at the University of North Carolina, working with the next generation of track and field stars. But beneath the surface, the emotional toll of his confession, the stripping of his titles, and the weight of public disgrace was overwhelming. On August 9, 2010, Antonio's wife had reported him missing, as he never returned home from his coaching job at the University of North Carolina. Two friends of his set out looking for him, retracing his route between his home and the North Carolina campus, where he had spent 4 seasons coaching. August 10, 2010, the two friends had discovered his car. They called the cops and told them he appeared to be sleeping, but he was unresponsive to them. When cops arrived on the scene, they had determined Antonio Pettigrew was found dead in the backseat of his car in Chatham Hill County, North Carolina. The cause of death was determined to be an overdose of sleeping pills, and the ruling was suicide. Pettigrew had left behind a wife, a young son, and a community still reeling from his downfall. The closest to Pettigrew spoke of his internal struggles in the years leading up to his death. He had been battling depression, overwhelmed by the guilt of his doping past and the public humiliation that came with it. The pressure of elite sports, the cost of winning at all costs, had finally taken their toll. Antonio Pettigrew's story is one of triumph, but also tragedy. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of the pressures placed on athletes to win at all costs, and the devastating consequences when the lines between right and wrong are blurred. In the years since his death, there has been efforts to remember Pettigrew not for just his mistakes, but for the person he was, an incredibly gifted athlete, like so many, succumbed to the pressure of elite competition. His widow, Cassandra, has spoken about her late husband's deep remorse, his desire to make amends, and the importance of forgiveness. Antonio Pettigrew's life was defined by speed. He spent years racing towards glory, only to be consumed by the very forces that drove him to the top. In the end, his tragic fall reminds us that even the fastest amongst us can't outrun the consequences of our choices. Today, Pettigrew's legacy remains complicated. He was a champion and a cheater, a mentor and a man consumed by regret. But perhaps his story can serve as a lesson, not just for athletes, but for all of us. Antonio Pettigrew's life may have ended in tragedy, but his legacy endures, a reminder of the human cost of chasing perfection in an imperfect world.